What if I told you there's a scientific formula that makes belief in God mathematically impossible? Not a preacher's opinion, not an atheist's slogan, but a formula built on over a century of peer-reviewed research. For more than 100 years, psychologists, sociologists, and neuroscientists have studied the relationship between intelligence and religion. And the results are so consistent, so undeniable, that they form what some researchers now call the equation of disbelief. But here's the catch. Most people never see this data. It's buried in academic journals, quietly ignored by religious institutions, and dismissed by mainstream media who fear the backlash. Over the next few minutes, I'm going to pull back the curtain on this formula, show you the studies behind it, and explain why every additional IQ point makes faith less and less likely. 100 years of data, 90,000 participants, 63 studies. One formula that religion doesn't want you to know exists. The formula didn't start as a grand theory. It began as an accident. In 1928, psychologist James Luba was running what seemed like a routine experiment. He was testing the intelligence of college students. Nothing controversial, nothing unusual. But then he noticed something strange. The brightest students, the ones scoring highest on his tests, were far less likely to believe in God. At first, Luba thought it had to be a fluke, a random blip in the data. But curiosity got the better of him. So he expanded the research. Instead of just testing students, he began surveying America's leading scientists, the elite minds shaping physics, biology, and psychology at the time. And the results? Nothing short of shocking. Only 15% of top scientists believed in a personal God. Compare that to nearly 95% of the general population back then. Think about that. The very people most trusted to uncover truth, to solve problems, to push the boundaries of knowledge, were overwhelmingly rejecting belief in God. What began as a statistical anomaly had revealed a pattern so consistent it would quietly echo through decades of research that followed. This was the first glimpse of what would later be called the formula that disproves God. Decades passed. The pattern kept showing up, but it wasn't until the 2000s that psychologists began to put numbers to it, turning what looked like coincidence into a formula. In 2008, psychologist Satoshi Kanazawa crunched data from over 15,000 Americans, and what he found was jaw-dropping. For every 15-point increase in IQ, religious beliefs dropped by roughly 10%. Not a vague trend, not a guess, an actual, measurable decline. The beginnings of a mathematical relationship between intelligence and faith. But the story didn't stop there. In 2009, researcher Richard Lynn went further than anyone before him. He analyzed 137 separate studies spanning nearly a century of data. Every single one showed the same inverse relationship: high IQ, low religiosity; low IQ, high religiosity. The statistical significance? Off the charts. And then came the study that turned a pattern into a definitive formula. In 2013, psychologist Miran Zuckerman published what became the gold standard analysis. 63 independent studies, over 90,000 participants, 6 decades of research. The conclusion was crystal clear. The correlation between intelligence and religiosity was -0.24. Now, if you don't live in the world of statistics, that number might sound small. But in psychology, it's huge. It's stronger than the link between height and weight in children. Stronger than the connection between education and income. This wasn't some shaky, debatable finding. This was robust, consistent, unmistakable. And when you boil it down, it becomes brutally simple. Higher intelligence equals lower belief in God. That's the formula. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. So why does this formula exist? Why does higher intelligence consistently mean lower belief in God? The answer lies deep inside the way our brains actually work. Psychologists call it dual process theory. Your mind runs on two different systems. System one is fast, emotional, instinctive. It's the voice that says, trust your gut. Believe what feels right. This is where religious faith thrives. Comfort, intuition, certainty. System two is slow, deliberate, analytical. It's the voice that says, wait. Let's check the evidence. Let's think this through. And here's the key. People with higher IQs rely more heavily on System 2. They don't stop at their first emotional reaction. They pause, analyze, and ask, is this actually true? This ability has a name, cognitive decoupling. It means separating how comforting an idea feels from whether it's supported by evidence. For example, when most people hear prayer heals the sick, their emotions light up. It feels good. It feels hopeful. But someone with strong cognitive decoupling asks, what do controlled studies show? How do we separate placebo from miracle? Where's the data? It's not that intelligent minds don't feel the emotional pull. It's that they can decouple it from their search for truth. And there's another layer, tolerance for uncertainty. Most people hate the phrase, I don't know. It creates anxiety, discomfort, a desperate need to fill the blanks. That's exactly where religion steps in, providing simple, absolute answers. But highly intelligent people, they can live with mystery. They can sit with the unknown. They'd rather have no answer than a wrong one. And science backs this up. Brain scans show that when highly intelligent people face conflicting information, the prefrontal cortex, the brain's executive center, lights up. Meanwhile, regions tied to emotional processing and pattern completion stay quieter. Their brains literally prioritize analysis over comfort, reason over reassurance, truth over tradition. This is the psychological engine driving the formula. And once you understand it, the decline of belief among the brightest minds stops being a mystery. It becomes inevitable. So far, this formula has played out in labs, surveys, and statistics. But does it actually hold up in the real world, across entire nations? The answer is yes, and the global proof is overwhelming. Let's start with the United States. According to the Pew Research Center, only 65% of college graduates identify as religious, compared to 75% of those with just a high school education. And when you zoom in on people with graduate degrees, masters, PhDs, professional doctorates, the number drops even further. Among PhD holders in the sciences, belief in God plummets to just 33%. This isn't a coincidence. It's called the college effect. Students often enter university with religiosity levels similar to the general population. But over the course of 4 years, something dramatic happens. Exposure to diverse perspectives, training in critical thinking, immersion in scientific methodology. By graduation, their religious belief has dropped by an average of 20%. And unlike other college habits, this one doesn't fade. 10 years later, 20 years later, the reduced belief remains permanent. But this isn't just an American phenomenon. The exact same pattern repeats in country after country. Sweden. 85% of the population has post-secondary education, and 76% are non-religious. Denmark. Some of the world's highest education rates, 80% secular. Japan and South Korea. World leaders in advanced education, both overwhelmingly non-religious. The Netherlands. More than half of university graduates identify as secular. Wherever education rises, religion collapses. The formula scales from individuals to entire societies. And it's not just about years of schooling. It's about what higher education actually teaches. How to evaluate evidence systematically. How to weigh multiple perspectives. How to distinguish correlation from causation. Universities also reveal a brutal truth most people never confront. That billions of humans hold mutually contradictory beliefs with absolute certainty. They can't all be right, but they could all be wrong. And once you see that contradiction, once you step into a world of comparative religion, scientific reasoning, and global perspective, the mystique dissolves. Faith starts looking less like eternal truth and more like cultural conditioning. That's the real global proof. The formula doesn't just live in spreadsheets and charts. It's reshaping entire civilizations. So what happens when belief in God collapses? Do intelligent people end up empty, lost, or nihilistic? The data says the opposite. Highly intelligent minds don't lose meaning. They build it without God, through the wonder of science, through the depth of human connection, through artistic creation, moral progress, and the search for truth itself. They don't need cosmic promises or supernatural rewards to feel purpose. They find it in reality, in the fact that we are conscious beings, briefly alive in an ancient universe. And here's the crucial shift. Instead of craving easy answers, intelligent people learn to embrace uncertainty. They can live with questions that don't have neat solutions. They can accept "I don't know" as a starting point, not a failure. The tolerance for mystery isn't weakness, it's intellectual maturity. And once you recognize how belief actually forms, the cultural conditioning, the psychological needs, the confirmation bias, religious authority loses its grip. Why trust ancient texts written by people who knew less about the cosmos than a modern seventh grader? Why obey leaders making claims they can't possibly prove? For the brightest minds, the spell is broken. Religion doesn't look sacred anymore. It looks human. And when that shift happens, it's irreversible. Now, at this point, critics always jump in with the same objections. And on the surface, they sound reasonable until you actually look at the data. The first one goes, it's just correlation. Correlation doesn't prove causation true enough. But here's the problem. This correlation holds even after controlling for everything researchers could think of. Socioeconomic status? Controlled. Geography? Controlled. Cultural background? Education level? Political leanings? Controlled. No matter how you slice it, the relationship between intelligence and disbelief remains rock solid. Next objection? But intelligence is hard to measure. IQ tests are flawed. And yes, IQ isn't perfect. But this pattern doesn't depend on just one test. It shows up with IQ scores, SAT results, academic performance, professional achievement. Every single measure of cognitive ability tells the same story. Then comes the fallback. Maybe the research is biased. Maybe academics are just hostile to religion. If that were true, the results wouldn't replicate across 100 years in dozens of countries by researchers with completely different agendas. Secular institutions, religious universities, government-funded projects, private think tanks, they all find the same thing. If bias or bad methodology were the cause, you'd expect at least a few major studies to point in the opposite direction. But in over a century of data, not one does. This isn't cherry-picking. This is convergence. And in science, when independent teams across time, culture, and method keep landing on the same conclusion, you've moved beyond debate. You've found a law of human psychology. The formula stands. So if this formula has held steady for 100 years, what happens next? Look around. Global literacy is at an all-time high. University enrollment is climbing in every developed nation. And billions now carry instant access to the world's knowledge in their pockets. Every single factor that reduces religiosity is accelerating. The result? Secular majorities are emerging country after country. Nations that were religious for centuries, sometimes millennia, are crossing the threshold into non-belief within a single generation. This isn't theory. It's happening right now, in Europe, in East Asia, in North America. Where education rises, faith falls, consistently, predictably, mathematically. We are living through the largest transformation of belief systems in human history. A shift that could redefine politics, morality, community, even identity itself. But here's the uncomfortable question. If religion fades, what takes its place? What fills the gap when the old gods lose their power? How do we create meaning, purpose, and morality without the structures billions once depended on? That's the challenge this formula leaves us with. And it's the question our generation will have to answer.